Hi, I'm Bob Campbell. I'm the author of the debut literary novel, Motel Man. And I, and I will begin by reading the opening section of the book. Keep in mind, I hold no hard feelings toward happiness. I trust that it feels the same toward me, not that that really matters. It just doesn't work as a union. We're too different, at least at this stage in our existence. The strange and perhaps beautiful thing about happiness is it doesn't require some kind of ceremony or legal action to join with it. It's as easy as declaring, I'm happy. Never mind if it's usually accompanied by or attached to some contrived reasons. It's still as easy an identity. It's still an identity that's as easy to don as slipping on a coat. You know how these folks you meet talk about finding God in religion and then reinterpret the word as often as necessary to conform to their worldview, no matter how twisted? That's happiness for you. The lack of a relationship with happiness leaves me open to experience life differently. Oh, sure, I have needs and desires that I wish to fulfill, and having done so would give me some satisfaction, temporary or longer. But what it wouldn't do is make me beholden to happiness. Why am I here? He asked. It's a question he had heard in some variation time and again, something he'd even asked himself more than once. He furrowed his brow and his eyes went searching for some version of truth. Rays of bright light stabbing through parted vertical blinds warmed the noiseless room. The sun's warmth belied the temperature outside. A fierce cold wind had swept down out of Canada and laid bare his true feelings about this so-called winter wonderland. It sucks. He turned inward, sighed, and tried to re-engage. Bradley had another stop to make before home. With the gas needle pressed to E, he was running on fumes, as they say. There were at least a few gallons in the tank, more than enough to complete his run of errands. Still, he could already hear Abby's subtle objection. Why do you always drive around on E so much? He pulled into the station just up the road a ways from his subdivision in Grand Heights, parked at a pump station near the road, and got out. Snow fell heavily, and he squinted amid the swirl of large flakes. A trail of footprints in the fresh layer of snow followed him across the pavement as he strode toward the building. The stop had only within the last few years morphed into a self-serve fuel plaza from the more intimate full-service station it had been to better serve an influx of more people like him. A young man exited the building as Bradley approached the entrance. A quick chin-up, head nod, that sly way brothers silently communicate fellowship was offered before the strangers looked past one another. The young man made haste through the snowfall to a nearby idling car, a tricked out maroon Toyota Supra, and vanished behind its smoky windows. Bradley noticed in an instant the curb appeal of such an automobile, even though it was by then several model years old. Nimble, sleek, stealthy, and un-American, cars like that weren't simply a threat, they were the enemy. The people who dared drive one in this town were traitors, fucking traitors, especially those who collected a weekly check from the major employer here. How could one dare bite the hand that nourished it? It was beyond comprehension. Bradley scrapped those ideas, though. He had worked in the shop long enough now to know the occasional auto worker who had opted for a Japanese or possibly a German car embodied something else other than simply being a, quote, fucking traitor. What exactly? He settled finally on freedom. They were driven by different ideas and inclinations, individuals, some of whom felt misplaced in this life. To Bradley, they were Yobs, named for that Martian baby mistakenly delivered to the Earthling couple after a cosmic collision sent the two newborns to the wrong planets in that old Merry Melodies cartoon. These people were certain it was in their DNA to do something else other than sitting at an assembly line for 8 hours a day, 5, maybe 6 days a week, or 7 if the plants were really pumping, making a wad of cash doing mindless tasks. So to quell the frustration and longing to accomplish in this life what they were truly meant for, the Yobs drove Toyotas, Nissans, or the occasional Beamer here and there. It was their way out of here, not unlike the Martian baby and that homemade spaceship of his. And they didn't give a rat's ass about what their union comrades or company men thought of them. The pursuit of happiness, it's what made this country great, right? And their choice of automobile was an individual declaration of independence. For these people were now cosmopolitan, professional, and above all, unbeaten in their stylish, well-engineered foreign cars, instead of looking like an overpaid shop rat behind the wheel of a lackluster Buick. Bradley trudged on across the whitened asphalt to make his way inside to pay for a fill-up.
And that was a reading from Motown Man. We are speaking with author Bob Campbell on the second annual Author Fair hosted by the Rochester Hills Public Library in conjunction with Rochester Writers. And for Rochester Writers, my name is Michael Dwyer. Bob, thank you so much for being here and reading that for us.
Thank you.
And this is your debut novel, so your first novel. How long has it been out?
It just came out in November 10th to be exact.
Wow, so we are fresh into it. How are the projections looking? What kind of responses are you getting?
Well, I'm getting a lot of reaction from the social media channels, from friends and colleagues in that regard. Haven't heard anything from the publisher yet or any sales numbers, but in terms of the personal network, the response has been very, very positive. I'm humbled by the reaction so far.
And by definition, it's a novel, so it's fiction. But I imagine you pull from a lot of personal experiences of people you know and maybe yourself.
Yeah, it's different characters are a composite of individuals or snatches of conversations that I've heard here and there in the barbershop or whatever that I found a way to work into the story. The setting is a city very much like Flint. So I borrow heavily from Flint, although it's not identified. And the suburban community in which the main characters live is completely fictional.
Okay. Who is this book for? Who do you think your reader is?
Well, it's a literary novel. And so I think that in many ways, even though I've worked on a project for a number of years, I think it has a lot of contemporary themes, particularly around the issue of race and communities in transition. And so I would think that readers of literary fiction certainly would find would be an audience for it. I think readers looking for Black male characters that are, that have a level of humanity that that I think is important, that has a lot of interest. I think that because it in many ways is a love story, in fact, I would say it's at its core, it's a love story. I would think that there could be a good women's audience for it as well. But it's an adult novel.
You mentioned more of a positive role model type for Black males. Does that mean that there's literature that is not really that style?
Well, I guess I don't mean to suggest that, but I think that the characters in my book are characters that I don't know if you see portrayed um, very much in popular fiction. You know, there are certain themes or situations that I think get a lot of play, and mine don't fit within that. It's not it's not quote unquote an inner city struggle kind of story. It's not a story of someone who has had an issue with law enforcement. So it's, these characters are career wise professionals in their late 20s, early 30s, in a city that is, not on one of the coasts. It's, not LA, not New York. It's middle America.
Okay. Okay. And do you think that there was a need for this, or is this just the story you wanted to tell and you're telling it?
It's the story I wanted to tell, and I've told it. Yes.
Well, that's wonderful. And I enjoyed what you read, and I know that you have a journalism background, and I could tell that a little bit in your writing. Was it difficult to transition from this nonfiction journalistic approach to writing a fiction story that really is a different style?
Yes, a little bit. Well, more than more than a little bit. With in being a journalist, your stories are, by and large, short and to the point. You have your inverted pyramid. Everything's right up top: who, what, when, why, where, how, and you sort of fill in the details from there. But sort of the story is told in those first couple of paragraphs, and that's very different in telling a story over the course of a novel. Certainly, you want to hook the reader early, but you don't give it away in the first two paragraphs. And so the development required much more patience, much more discipline. Yeah, discipline, because because as you're getting further into the story, you're going back and tweaking here and there to make sure that the flow is consistent. So yes, it's a different kind of writing.
And certainly a long form such as a novel is intimidating. It is to me. I'm a journalist as well, and so the shorter pieces, 500 words, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, that's more my style. But when you say, okay, give me 40 to 80,000 words, I'm like, on the same thing.
Right.
And so, it's a whole different style. So I applaud you on making that transition. But if we could touch a little bit on your nonfiction journalism background, how did you get involved in writing?
Well, I've always liked to write, but it was not the kind of thing where I was one of these kids who was constantly writing stories. Although I will say this, my mother says, and you got to believe what your mother tells you. She said that I told her years ago that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. I don't remember that, but I'm going to trust that what she said is true. But in school, it was always just something that is sort of part of being a good student, being able to write. But I enjoyed it, and so something as simple as preferring an essay test versus a multiple choice type test. I love doing research papers in school, but again, never really connected it in that way. And later, as I was older, really trying to understand, well, what is it that I want to do? I was working. I did work in the shop for 7 years before I became a reporter. And so it was something that just kind of evolved over time, that it was a skill, a craft that I really enjoyed. And increasingly, as you're kind of observing the world around you, you start asking questions, and even questions of like, well, what if this, what if that, and wouldn't that make for kind of an interesting story? And So that's kind of how I kind of moved into it after doing a couple of other things.
Yeah, and you've worked for several different newspapers around the country. You want to just recap those quickly and maybe mention which was your favorite?
Sure, sure. So I started out at the Flint Journal, my hometown. I started out actually as a stringer. I don't know if they use that term anymore, or freelancer.
Yeah, old schoolers do.
So I worked at the Flint Journal for a couple of years, and I was really wanted to sort of test my skills in a different community, and wound up at the Lexington Herald-Leader. I learned a little bit about it. It's a very good paper, aggressive for its size. It won, I think it won 2 Pulitzers before I joined the paper. So it had a very outstanding reputation. And it was in a different part of the country that was, very different from the industrial Midwest, going to the upper South, which was much more agrarian, if you will, in kind of its orientation. And then was there for just under 5 years, and then came back to Michigan, worked for the Detroit Free Press for a couple of years, about a year and a half. And then I moved into, went to work for a trade publication. By far, I think my favorite stop was the Lexington paper. I learned so much there. I covered state and federal courts initially, and had an opportunity to cover some really fascinating trials. It was actually still a beat reporter when there was a police shooting that, unfortunately, you've heard a lot more about in recent years, of a young Black male was shot by a police officer unarmed, and but that was quite a story to cover. And then from there, I moved into writing editorials for the newspaper and did occasional columns too, and did few book reviews. So it really had a chance to sort of stretch myself there in a couple of different ways. And then was, wanted to get back to Michigan, and went back, joined the Detroit Free Press, which was at the time, the Herald-Leader and the Free Press was all part of the Knight Ridder chain. And did that for, like I say, just over a year, and kind of got burned out, I guess, and kind of moved on.
Yeah, well, as we all do when it comes to writing and beats, and it's funny that you've covered the Motor Cities version of horsepower as well as the Kentucky version of horsepower.
I've never thought of it like that. Yes.
So different, but both very entertaining, and I bet you don't miss covering federal trials right now.
Yeah, that would be something.
That's gotta be tough, no matter what the situation is, because you're dealing with loss and victims and very serious outcomes. So it must be nice to move to something like a book where you can just write your own words and drive the story your own way. Do you have plans for a follow-up? Or is it too soon to tell since you just released this one?
Well, I have a couple of different ideas that I've been kind of gathering notes on, gathering string on. I've been thinking about something centered around the Flint water emergency. It hasn't fully formed yet. Got a couple of ideas for some short stories that I've actually been working on, but you kind of, one thing is, we sort of talked about at the outset, with fiction versus nonfiction, journalism in particular, that it's not bang bang bang. It's you kind of, it's more of a it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it takes time, patience. And so, but in terms of from the idea and stage, I've got several different ideas I really want to dig into.
Well, I'm sure you're going to get to them all writers do that. They have lots of ideas and lots of directions, and that's their courses is writing the next novel. We've been speaking with Bob Campbell, author of Motown Man. Is there a place where people can go, Bob, to find out more about you, your book, and maybe a place to buy it?
Yes, yes. So Motown Man is available on Amazon Books. It's also available through my publisher, which is Urban Farmhouse Press. It's a Windsor, Ontario based publisher, and it's Urban Farmhouse, all one word, .ca. You can find it there. And I also have a personal website where I have some of my nonfiction essays housed at Bob Campbell Writes, all one word, .com.
Wonderful. Bob Campbell, author of Motown Man, thank you so much for joining us for the second annual author fair hosted by the Rochester Hills Public Library. We'll have another author in just a moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much.